Thank you very much for taking your time and for inviting me here. Yes, I'm a journalist by heart, and I am thrilled to be with you at also at the journalism school, where you have these high ethical values and you have the same aspirations for our profession. There's an American saying, if you do as you always have done, you probably end up with the results you always gotten. So that's why journalism students, journalism training is not about teaching what the rest of us have done for the last 50 years, but is actually to train you to think for yourself. Because if you just copy what we have done, you will most likely just enhance the problems we have created. I love journalism. I think it's important, but I think we need to raise a lot of questions. And one of the most important questions for you all to look at now is, why did you choose to become a journalist? I mean, you could have chosen to become a lawyer and become rich, but still you chose journalism. And why? And what is journalism? What's the role in society? Is the meaning of journalism trying to get attention? You could think that if you look at what a lot of newsrooms out there are focusing on every day. Is it to make a profit for shareholders? Money is extremely important in journalism, because we need a salary. But is that the sole purpose of it? Or is journalism, is the purpose of journalism just to make people smile, despite the fact they have nothing to smile of? Some people talk about that when they talk about the need for positive journalism, happy journalism, good news, and all that. And you'll find that's not what I will talk about today. I'll talk about that we are now maybe hopefully coming out of the COVID-19 crisis. Some places it's not. But what have we learned? We are just getting out of a presidency in the United States that has showed us that we can't take democracy for granted, even in such a country which we have all looked up to for decades, for being the prime example of what great journalism can do, what great politics can do. And now we have seen that it can change very rapidly. And what has the role been of media in all of that? All around the world, we now see protesters fighting against politicians, fighting against, not saying we don't trust experts, we don't trust our politicians, and we certainly don't trust journalists. The picture to the right is a picture from a demonstration not many weeks ago against the restrictions due to COVID-19 in little peaceful Denmark, where the demonstrators, they burned a doll made out of look-liking the Danish Prime Minister. We have never seen anything like that before. And is that a little incident, or should we think about what's going on and what's our role in it as citizens, as politicians, if we are that, experts, or journalists? If we do as we always have done, we probably end up with the results we always gotten. So the big questions for all of us and the industry, my profession, and that was the reason why I quit my job as a news director after 10 years running the biggest newsroom in Denmark, because there were so many things that I thought we needed to change and find answers to. And the two most important questions that stuck in my mind was this: is journalism actually part of the problem of the trust meltdown in society? And if that's true, then we're not only a victim of digital change, but we're also partly to blame for the crisis we have. And the second one, how do we become part of the solution? Because we have to. You guys, you have to go out being great journalists, because people out there need somebody to filter the world with the right principles. Give people the best obtainable version of the truth, because who else in society can people trust to do that? If we were not there, if media were not there, if journalists, decent, good journalists, were not in society, who should they trust? Who should they expect to tell them the best obtainable version of the truth in order for people to make up their own mind? Would it be banks Insurance companies? Interest groups? Can we count on Google and Facebook to do it? And what about the political parties themselves? They would most certainly claim that, but no, they can't. We are important. The choice you have made in order to join this profession is so important. But journalism is not just a product to be sold, and that's so important. It is a product. We need money. We want a salary. We want attention, but not at any price. And can we do great reporting and do good for society and make a living out of it at the same time? I'm sure that you are not being told the same things that we were being told when I entered journalism, being 18 years old, many years ago, back in 1982, the first day in journalism school. We were 400 young students sitting there looking down to the first person we've ever met who was a real journalist, and he was a teacher. He had actually had a job many years ago. And he was telling us, with this voice you only get if you drink too much whiskey and smoke too many cigarettes and have too many deadlines in too many years. He looked at us and say, a good story is a bad story. And if nobody gets mad, it's not journalism. It's advertising. And we wrote it down. Oh, a good story is a bad story. That's what it was. That's what he did. He quoted great reporters and editors from around the world, like this one from Britain, saying, before interviewing any politician, ask yourself, why is this bastard lying to you? And we wrote it down. Great. Any politician is an asshole. We just have to figure it out. And we watched great movies about journalists, like these ones. Tipping presidents. They look like Robert Redford. We wanted to go out and tip president, which was a problem when we had our first internship, realizing we live in a monarchy in Denmark. But then we had to find somebody else to tear down, because otherwise we were not good journalists. To be honest, in my career, and I know it goes for a lot of my colleagues as well, the biggest fear we have had is that somebody we looked up to, other journalists, old guys in the profession, looked at us and said, you're not being critical enough. You're just holding the microphone for power. You belong not in the newsroom, but in the marketing department. That would be the worst. So I've been almost aggressive when I interviewed somebody, when other journalists could see it, so nobody could claim that I was not critical enough. I still talk to journalism schools, and I do a lot of talks for journalists around the world. And they say, we learned that the goal of journalism is to be critical. And we have to angle any story on a conflict not to fail our paper. That is misunderstandings. The goal of journalism is not to be critical. Being critical is the most important tool. You have to be critical, but not as a goal, but as a tool, as a mean in order to do good journalism. The goal is to give people the best obtainable version of the truth, right? In order to make them smarter about each other and the world, in order for them to make better decisions in their own life. Not to be critical in itself. Not so other journalists think that you're great, but in order to paint a picture that's accurate and fair. And that idea that you have to angle any story on a conflict in a subject you really don't understand as a journalism student, you have somebody saying that, your job is then to go out and find somebody who will oppose that, and then you have a story, right? That leads to something, and let's talk about that. One thing that I found, and that'd be very naive, I should have thought about it before, but the essence is that journalism is a filter between reality and the perception of reality. And perception of reality is extremely important, because people out there in India, in Denmark, around the world, they don't make decisions based on what is the facts. What are the facts? They make decisions based on what they perceive to be the facts. So perception is so important, and no other profession filters that than journalism as much as that. Because where do we get our perception from? We get it from what we can see with our own eyes, and the rest of it is actually media. In Britain, they have a political debate based on slogans and perception. We want our country back, they said during Brexit. And nobody asked the question, who stole it? But that was the whole idea. People should think that Germany was stealing. They lost the war, and now they're stealing Great Britain back. What was that? That was not true. But the voters voted Great Britain out of EU. You also see it in the media. 40% of the American public still think that this slogan is true. Fox News, fair and balanced. I tell you, it's not true. And a lot of oil companies around the world now change their logo. Why? This is British petrol. Looks like a sun, right? 95% of their investment is still in black energy, but they want us to think that they are now becoming a green company. They're not. So we paint a picture, and the picture people have in their own minds is what guides them. That influence what they buy, where they go, how they vote. Everything is about perception. So the way media filters the world, what kind of pictures does that lead into? That can be people in your own country, and it can be other countries around the world. For instance, India. What is India? Is this a picture of India? Is this the true picture of India? Is this the true picture, or this? Or is it some kind of a mix of it all? I'm so glad that I'm not in your town today, because I just checked the websites around the Indian pages that I could understand, and just to see what was the way India was being perceived towards Indian people in your country and abroad. Maybe think this is a depressing place. This is full of people yelling, dying, despair. This was just yesterday, false promise of marriage, but wrong, but top court on partner's alleged rape. Oh, that's not a good place to be. And you can 93 tiger death in three years. That doesn't happen in Denmark. I'm not going to India, I tell you that. All these stories, and you could go on and all, and to see the way India is being filtered. Is that a real picture of India, or is it just the notion that a good story is a bad story? Otherwise, it's just advertising. Maybe you get the point. People get scared. People say, "Oh, fearful." Maybe there's a truth to the way I have been trained as a journalist is if I go out in reality, I don't look for normality. I look for what is extreme, either the pure white or the pure black, most likely the pure black, but everything in between. This is the curve of normality. Income. It can be the grades in your class. A journalist will go in and interview the person who got the highest grades or the lowest grade, not the ones in the middle, which is the majority. Why do we do that? Because it influences the way people think about reality. If we focus so much on what is extreme, there's a tendency that people end up thinking that the normality is what is extreme, right? And this goes for instance, news agencies. They're covering stories. I did a talk for the news agencies around the world where they had a world conference in Lisbon. And I just took the 50 latest stories from Associated Press. What had they filtered for news media around the world, which again filtered how people thought about the world, right? So out of those 50 stories, only 5 of them were not directly depressing. One of those stories, which were not depressing, was the story about Dalai Lama, who did not die anyway. They had just told that 20 minutes ago, but no, that was not true. So they had to write a news story about that. The rest of the stories had these words in their headlines. And the point is, it's not misinformation. It's not fake news. It's true. It has happened. But the way news agencies, journalists around the world portray the world is looking for something like this. And people look at it and they think the world is like this. And it leads to people think that the world is different than it actually is. Why? When Reuters started Reuters Bureau in London, he was a German moving to London in the 19th century. He was telling people who he wanted to pay for some information, which he called news. And look what he asked them. It was not a real email, but the wording is right. is that please cover the following: fires, explosions, floods, inundation, railway accidents, destructive storms, earthquakes, shipwrecks attended with loss of life. You can read yourself. This is news. A good story is a bad story. Why did it start like that? Because one of the first clients he had at Reuters, the first news bureau in the world, was insurance companies. Insurance companies, they wanted two things. One, they wanted stories about risks around the world. Number two, they wanted him to publish those stories about risks in order to scare people, in order for people to sign up to buy an insurance policy. Isn't that interesting? That creates culture. And the British press did that, and they influenced the way the Indian press, the former colony, was portraying the world. This is a global illness. This is what we do. And the media strategy in the digital age, where we can't really think because we have a new deadline in 20 seconds, right? All the time. We produce more stories, louder stories, more breaking, sharper headlines, faster deadlines on more and more platforms with fewer people and less money. And if you were a McKinsey consultant looking at that strategy, would you think that sounds like a winning one? No, it's not. But we are so pressured for time that we don't have time to think, how can we do this differently? People are looking at what we are doing around the world in newsrooms and saying negativity is an illness caused by even serious news media all over the world. And the problem is not that the numbers are wrong. The problem is that the picture gets wrong, right? This is a survey which is interesting between reality and the public perception of reality. And look at France, for instance. 8% people in France are Muslim when they count it. But people in France think that 1 out of 3 people in France are now Muslim. See, the gap is the dark blue. So if the only Muslim people you know in your country is people who in TV on your phone blow each other and the rest of us up with suicide bombs, extremists, who will you vote for in a French election? You could also look at economy. Look at Italy, for instance. They had a high, this was pre-corona numbers, but high unemployment rate, 12%. But the stupid Italian people think that the unemployment rate in Italy is 49. If you think the unemployment rate is 49, that half the population can't find a decent job, you have lost all faith in the system, in any government, and any stand-up comedian that runs for president or prime minister in Italy will get elected until he can't do it either, and people lose faith in him. So they have constant switch of power in Italy, and they have a terrible economy. So it is extremely important how truth is portrayed. Look at this one. Asking the same kind of questions. The difference between reality and the public perception of it. And Ipsos Morris in London has looked at different countries. Who got it most wrong around the world? And your country is number 12 in the world by countries getting it wrong. See? Look at India. We also get it wrong in Denmark, but not so much as you do. Thailand, terrible. This kind of thinking about news is actually being exploited by forces in society. One of them being terrorists. The best weapon for terrorists is not Kalashnikovs or suicide bombs. It's actually news media. They do something that is so dramatic, so extreme, so violent that that it talks into our news criteria. We have to cover it. And in order to do so, we do what they want. They want to spread the fear. I'm not saying that Donald Trump is a terrorist, but I'm just saying that he also understands this mechanism. That was the reason why he got elected in the first place, and that he got more votes the second time. It was only because Joe Biden got even more that Donald Trump was not reelected. And why was Donald Trump being reelected? No, not reelected, but elected in the first place. Because he was being overexposed, also at a time when he was not really big. Why? Because he was a freak show. This guy at CBS, at this time, in 2016, when he was being criticized, he said to the question, why do you broadcast live from all Donald Trump's rallies and not from everybody else's. He said, it may not be good for America, but it's damn good for the CBS. The money's rolling in. Bring it on, Donald. Go ahead, keep going. And Donald did and got elected. So this is much more about lies, and it's much more about misinformation. It's about things happening in society. And one of the biggest things happening in society right now is that it has become socially acceptable in a lot of countries. I don't know about yours, but in mine and in a lot of countries in Europe and United States, it is socially acceptable among people to say to each other, we don't want to watch news anymore. It's not good for us. This is a scary story documenting that. A story from Washington Post talking about a giant fitness chain in the United States banning the use of news in the fitness chain out of the argument it doesn't relate to a healthy lifestyle to watch news. What? So now it has become an argument. It's not good for your health to watch news. News is not good for you. I have been trained, Timothy has been trained to think that following news is being the essence of being a decent citizen. And now people talk about journalism as something that is not good for society and for your mental health. Something has to change. So the big questions is, are we more focused on getting attention than serving people the best obtainable version of the truth? Have we turned journalism into a product more than seeing it as a basis for democracy? Are we more interested in news stories that are not wrong, that if they are actually painting a right picture? And again, are we part of the problem, and how do we become part of the solution? That's what constructive journalism is all about. Constructive news, and what is it and what it's not. It's not a new religion. Hey, guys, it's not something you can convert to. I've written a book. It's not a Bible. It's not even very good. It was the first one, but it's not a Bible. There's nothing you have to learn by heart. It's a new vocabulary. I'm so old, I remember when somebody in journalism in the late 70s, early 80s, starting talking about we needed more investigative reporting. And old journalists said, investigative journalism, what is that? Every journalism is investigative, otherwise it's not journalism. But that was not the case. We didn't do a good enough job. We were not controlling power. We were just handing people the microphone. We were not really digging beneath the surface. So good reporters and editors had to come together and say, we need to talk about quality in a new way. We need to invent new ways of doing for the public what we need to do. And that was investigative journalism. Because we had that, we could start teaching it, and we could start come up with concept, finding ways of interviewing, getting documents, data journalism. All that came out of having a new word, a new vocabulary. The same thing with constructive journalism. It's a word. And I picked the word constructive because I thought nobody could be against that. Turned out not to be true. A lot of misunderstanding around it. But it means actually having or intended to have a useful or beneficial purpose. Isn't all journalism having a beneficial purpose? As I just told you, no, not really. So we need to talk about that. Thinking that journalism is a feedback mechanism that should help society self-correct. And no, it's not a North Korean version of positive news. It's a new mindset in journalism. Can we, instead of making the conflict bigger, the ditch deeper, can we see journalism as bridge building in society? Can we help people to understand each other more, to see the full picture more? Cross gaps. Can we counter the notion in the press which says, if it bleeds, it leads? Remember when Joe Biden was put into president? Maybe you saw it in television. I almost cried when I saw this young poet saying this in her poem about democracy. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. So this is not about positive journalism. It's not make people smile. But it's about giving a nuanced picture. And let me talk about what it is. It's fighting one-sided journalism. Insisting to see the world with both eyes when we are journalists, going out in reality. Not only seeing all the things that confirms your angle when you leave the newsroom. And the solution is, of course, not that you go out and close your eyes to the problem and only see the good stuff. You have to see both. You can't be constructive unless there's a problem to be constructive about. And when I should try to find out for myself, what did I mean by that? I realized I had been trained to use two sets of glasses in order to filter the world for people. And the first filter, the first set of glasses I put on was the news glass. Now we call it breaking news. When I was young, it was just called news. It's the same thing. It's about telling people what has happened as fast as possible, as fast as technology allows you to. So the goal itself is speed. Asking the question, now what, and when, and where. The more dramatic, the better. We are a police car rolling out to the accident, and we angle on the drama and the conflict, and the more drama and the more conflict, the better the story, right? That's important for societies, that somebody do that. Don't exaggerate. I tell you, in a small country such as mine, not a lot is happening. So sometimes we exaggerate a little thing. A little burglary is a big headline. Then there's another set of glasses. And that set of glasses is called investigative journalism. Very important for society. And what is happening in a lot of newsrooms is people is cutting down on this and put the resources over at the first one in order, because there's a new platform to do breaking news on. I have to do Snapchat news as well. But what is the essence of investigative journalism? Thinking about it, I've spent most of my career working with that, and I love it. I think it's fantastic, and I think it's so needed. But when I look at it and see what stories I did and what other people are doing when they call it investigative journalism, it's always about yesterday. Think about it. It's always about who's to blame for the problems we're in. We ask, who did it? Why did it happen? We are critical in our approach. We play the role of a prosecutor and sometimes a judge if we don't take care. And we angle on the crook and the victim. Very important for society. But if I'm right saying that perception is reality for people, and that we are the biggest filter between reality and the public perception of reality, and if these are the ways we filter the world for people, what do we talk about in society? We talk about now, and we talk about yesterday, right? What is actually politics about? What is actually a democratic conversation about? It's always about tomorrow, right? Tomorrow, the future. How can we improve something? How can we solve it? But that doesn't fit into the real news criteria of news. So we skip it. So I've been trained, if somebody in the public debate comes up in Denmark and say, I have a solution to this idea, I will invite her into the studio and I will find somebody who hates her, and I will start asking her, asking the invited guest, okay, what do you think about her idea? And that person will say by instinct, that's a damn stupid idea. And then I will say, you also have to say something. What do you say to the fact that she just called you stupid? And then they will have a fight about how stupid she is. And after 2 minutes and 30 seconds, the news anchor will interrupt and say, well, you won't agree tonight, but the debate will go on. Thank you for coming. What was the idea about? What was the problem actually it tried to solve? Was I really not interested in hearing about the idea, but I was mainly interested in the fight about the idea? I was conducting my journalism as a boxing ring, inviting people into a studio, into programs by which we names from warfare, duels, crossfire, interview victim. We call this something as a fight, not in order to make people understand and think and get involved and being engaged. Constructive journalism is not an alternative to these two. Constructive journalism builds on these two. You can't be constructive unless there's a well-documented problem to be constructive about, otherwise it's just nice. So constructive journalism builds on this. So when you know this, we'll say journalism can also be and should also be about tomorrow. It could also have the goal of inspire. It can ask questions that I did not learn in journalism school. Those questions are now what and how, pointing to the future. And we're curious, we facilitate the debate, and we angle on potential solutions and best practice. This is the full circle of reporting. So when you describe a problem, we ask now, what, and how. You ask the potential solution to the problem, but then you also critical in your questions for this. Can we see the document? Does it work? Is it scalable? Does it work in Bangalore, or can it also work in Delhi? If it's only in Bangalore, maybe it's not so interesting. If it's just an idea you haven't documented it works, maybe we shouldn't go out and promote the idea until we have looked at it. Is the solution scalable? So this is not about not being critical, but it's not as a goal, but as a journalistic tool. Be critical also towards ideas. So words matter. The way we filter the world. Same newspaper, 2 different countries, same day. Daily Mail. Corona started, many loved ones will die. Boom. Or, as they did in Ireland, the same day, together we can save many lives. What kind of engagement does this erase? What kind of fear does this erase? What is the purpose of publishing stories like this? When we talk about constructive journalism, and I won't talk so much about it, there are 3 pillars of it, as we call it. It's focus on solutions, that's easy. It's covering nuances, and it's promote democratic conversation, engaging people. First example, the solutions. South Korea started in Corona, testing, addressing the problem that we needed to test a lot of people around the world very fast, very secure. They thought, why don't we do it like they do at McDonald's, McDrive? So people in cars being safe, roll down the window, test, get the result on SMS. That story spread around the world is now a standard most places in order to test a lot of people. If we, talking about the second one, about nuances, if we only count the people dying from Corona, people will stop thinking, they will panic, thinking everything's go down the drain, we'll all die. We can't do like Trump and say, oh, this is just a flu, nothing's happening. But we have to look at the facts, see the world with both eyes. People die, but there are also people getting well again. So we have to do both. And the third one is, how can we involve people in a dialogue? This is an example from a regional TV station. They spent all their resources in the spring and start of Corona, saying we want to be the go-between experts, politicians, and the public, and getting the experts and the decision makers to answer the questions from the public. So they asked the public, what do you want us to use our journalism tools for in order to answer your questions? They spent all their time on that, and their level of trust and the engagement rate, the views and the ratings went through the roof. This kind of thinking is now spreading around the world. Public service companies now call it, answers the question of why public media quality journalism matters to society, gives our news a clear purpose. A lot of newsrooms have now implemented strategies of constructive journalism in the way they're doing it, and they're getting results out of it. Even in Australia, where we had a workshop just before Corona. And it does work. All the newsrooms working with this find, like The Guardian here, that people read constructive stories more than traditional news stories. And they spend more time on them. Turns out that people don't read traditional news stories about suicide bombs in Yemen to the end. They scan. But stories about people who do something the rest of us might learn from, they do read them to the end. And they share them more on social media. And their editor-in-chief, after 18 months of experimenting with constructive journalism, now had this conclusion. We will now develop ideas that help improve the world, not just critique it. Despair is just another form of denial. People long to feel hopeful again, and young people especially yearn to feel the hope that previous generations once had. Just imagine if we old guys in the news business have deprived generations, young people, for hope, that they all think that we're gonna die and live in rubber boats in 4 years. If there's also stories about hope, ways out, things you can do, we should state the problem, but also talk about ways out and hope. So in conclusion, when I quit my job, I realized that this is so important, not only for journalism, but for society, that none of us can go on saying somebody has to do something about it somewhere at some time. You and I have to think that we have to be the change we are all waiting for. So thank you for choosing to become a journalist. Thank you for not switching off yet. And I do look forward to getting into a dialogue on how can we make journalism great again. Thank you very much.